I have been asked, more than once, what changed me. My steward believes it was the weather that winter, the long frost that kept us all indoors and turned my temper inward. My cousin insists it was a wager lost. They are both wrong. Changed me was a woman who arrived at Thornwall Park in a hired carriage with 2 trunks and a sheet of music tucked under her arm, and who looked at the front of my house, that great cold pile of stone my father built to impress men he despised, and said quietly, to no one in particular, "Well, it is very tall." Her name was Cecily Marne. She was 23 years old. She had no money, no connections of any use, and no talent, according to her guardian, Mr. Aldous Fenn, for making herself agreeable to the right sort of people. He had written me 3 letters over the course of the autumn, each one more candid than the last, laying out what he called the situation with the blunt efficiency of a man selling livestock. Miss Marne was the ward of his late brother's estate. The late brother had left, among other things, a guardianship bond tied in a bewildering knot to an old Thornwall inheritance clause, something my grandfather's solicitor had devised and which no one had thought to untangle in 40 years. The upshot, as Fenn explained it, was that the girl's marriage settlement required my signature, or the whole arrangement defaulted to my jurisdiction. He had found her a placement, Lord Wycombe, a minor baron in Gloucestershire with a large house, a small income, and 3 motherless children who needed managing. All I needed to do was review the contract and sign. I intended to sign it the morning she arrived. I had the document on my desk. I did not sign it. She was shown into the library while I was still reviewing the clause in question. And instead of waiting in the hall as she had been asked, she walked in, set her 2 trunks just inside the door with the calm of a woman who had decided she would not be kept outside of rooms that pertained to her, and said, "Your Grace, I apologize for the disruption. Your housekeeper seemed uncertain where to put me. I thought I would put myself and save her the trouble." I looked up. She did not look away. I had expected. I am not certain what I had expected. Something easier to dismiss. The ward of an indebted estate, delivered like a parcel, ought to have been grateful and quiet. Cecily Marne was quiet, but it was the particular quiet of a person who has decided which battles to fight and is conserving herself accordingly. Her dress was plain. Her eyes were steady. She held the rolled sheet of music in her left hand, as though she had simply forgotten to put it down. And there was something in that small detail, the music, carried without apology into my library, that I could not immediately account for. "The housekeeper will find you a room by this evening," I said. "The contract will be reviewed by Thursday." "Thank you, Your Grace," she said, and sat down in the chair beside the window without being invited, and looked out at the frost on the lawn, and did not trouble me further. Should have signed the contract that Thursday. I told myself, for the fortnight that followed, that the delay was procedural. There was a question about the inheritance clause. There was correspondence to review. There was always something. In the meantime, Cecily Marne moved through Thornwall Park as though she had always been slightly ahead of where anyone expected her to be. She's unfailingly courteous to my staff, who began within a week to defer to her in small ways I noticed and could not explain. She was precise and unornamented in conversation at dinner, the nights I did not take my meal in the study, and she never once asked me anything. She could find out for herself. It was the pianoforte that undid me. On a Tuesday evening in the 3rd week of her stay, I passed the music room and heard her playing, not the simple, pleasant exercises young women performed at country house gatherings. Something else. Peace was her own. I understood that immediately, from the way she paused once, changed a phrase, and then played the corrected version through as though she were arguing gently with herself, and had arrived at the right answer. It was the music on the sheet she had carried under her arm. She had been carrying her own composition into my house, and had said nothing about it to anyone because no one had thought to ask. I stood in the corridor for longer than I will admit. When I finally moved on, I did not go back to the study. I sat in the adjoining room in the dark and listened until she finished, and after the last note died, I heard her sigh. A small, private sound, the sound of a woman who is used to doing the things that matter to her entirely alone, and then the soft fall of the instrument's cover, and her steps retreating toward the stairs. I called for Fenn the following week. He arrived from London on the Friday, Lord Wycomb's solicitor in tow, contracts in order, every document my grandfather's clause required. We convened in the drawing room. Cecily was informed by a footman I regret sending that her presence was requested. She walked in wearing her plainest dress. I believe she knew. Fenn arranged the papers on the writing table with the efficiency of a man who had managed a great many inconvenient situations and expected this to be no different. She has no prospects, he said. For the solicitor's benefit, with the cheerful bluntness of someone stating the weather. No portion to speak of, no connections of use, and no particular talent for making herself agreeable to the right sort. Wycomb's offer is generous under the circumstances. Pushed the contracts toward me. I looked at them for a moment. Then I looked at Cecily, who was standing quite still beside the window. The same window, as it happened, where she had sat on the morning she arrived and looked out at my frost-covered lawn and asked nothing of me and apologized to no one. She was not looking at Fenn. She was looking at me, and in her eyes there was neither pleading nor defeat, only that steadiness, that private, unhurried steadiness, that had been quietly rearranging things inside me for 6 weeks, without my permission. I picked up the contracts, folded them once, cleanly along their center crease, and placed them on the fire. Fenn made a sound. The solicitor stood. The clause, I said, pulls to my jurisdiction. I am exercising it. I turned to Lord Wycomb's man. You'll convey my regards to the Baron. The matter is resolved. I waited until they had gathered their remaining papers and withdrawn. Fenn last, stiff with outrage, saying something about propriety that I did not trouble to hear. And then there were only 2 of us in the drawing room, and the fire, and the winter light coming pale through the window. I crossed the room. I stopped a proposition from her, because she deserved the choice, and because I had learned in 6 weeks that Cecily Marne did not respond to anything that resembled a command. I am not a man who finds words easily, I said. You will have observed that. I have, she said. Then I will say only what is essential. I looked at her. You are not a liability. You are not a placement. You are not a problem requiring a solution. You are... I paused, because the word I wanted was one I had not said aloud in a great many years, and saying it required more of me than burning a contract. You are the only entirely irreplaceable thing in this house. And I would very much like it if you would stay. Not under any clause, under any bond, under your own decision. The fire settled. Outside, a carrion crow called once across the frozen lawn. You listen to me play, she said. It was not a question. For considerably longer than I will ever publicly confess. Something changed in her face. Not the grand alteration of a woman who has won a battle, but the quieter, more private thing. The loosening of a guard kept up so long it had become ordinary. Then yes, Your Grace, she said, and her voice was steady and warm and entirely her own. I will stay. I have been called many things in my life, most of them variants of cold, exacting, and impossible. But on that January afternoon, with the fire at my back and Cecily Marne looking at me as though I had finally, after considerable delay, said the right thing, I was only grateful. Grateful that my grandfather had written an obscure clause in an inheritance bond. Grateful that Aldous Fenn had needed a signature. Grateful, above everything, that she had carried her music into my house and not waited for permission. She became my Duchess that April. The ceremony was small. She wore her hair in loose curls and she carried nothing, no flowers, no gloves, only herself, which had always been, as I was now certain the whole world should know, entirely enough.